an isolated ranch in the heart of Texas. A seasoned rancher, known for never missing a single day of work, suddenly vanishes without a trace, along with his half-ton prize bull. No signs of a struggle, no footprints. Just the gate left wide open and the haunting sound of the wind cutting through the silence. 3 days later, the neighbors find something, and what they see changes everything about the investigation. It wasn't theft. It wasn't a runaway. It was something no one could explain, not even the sheriff. And the strangest part, the bull was still there, alive, but the rancher had seemingly evaporated. Hank Dalton had worked the Double D Ranch for 37 years, every single day, rain or shine, scorching heat or freezing cold. The man was as reliable as sunrise, which was why when he didn't show up for coffee at May's diner on Thursday morning, people noticed. "That's not like Hank," May told Sheriff Tom Rawlings when he stopped in for his usual. "Man hasn't missed Thursday coffee in 15 years. Tom wasn't overly concerned at first. Hank was 58, divorced for a decade, living alone on 1,200 acres of scrubland 20 miles outside of Marfa. Maybe he'd overslept, had truck trouble, decided to skip town for once. But when Hank's neighbor, Carlos Ruiz, called the sheriff's office that afternoon, Tom's concern sharpened into worry. "His truck's here, but Hank's not," Carlos said, his voice tight. "Gate to Sampson's pen is wide open. The bull's gone too. Tom, something's wrong." Tom drove out immediately, his deputy following in a second vehicle. The ranch sat at the end of a long dirt road surrounded by endless Texas scrubland, mesquite, cactus, and red dirt stretching to the horizon. Hank's property bordered wild country, the kind where coyotes howled at night and the occasional mountain lion left tracks in the dust. The truck was parked by the barn, keys still in the ignition. Hank's work boots sat on the porch. He'd gone inside to change into his good boots, the ones he wore for working cattle. The house was unlocked, coffee still in the pot from Wednesday morning, and Sampson's pen stood empty, the gate swinging in the hot wind. Sampson was Hank's pride, a massive black Angus bull, 2,000 pounds of pure muscle and champion genetics, worth $40,000 easy, maybe more. Hank had raised him from a calf, showed him at state fairs, turned down offers from breeders across the country. "Man loved that bull like a son," Carlos said, standing at the fence with Tom. "He'd never leave the gate open. Never." Tom studied the ground. No struggle, no blood, no obvious signs of trouble. Just boot prints. Hank's size 11 work boots, leading from the house to the pen, then nothing. The prints vanished in the hard-packed dirt. "Sampson's prints head that way," Deputy Linda Chen said, pointing toward the back pasture. "But Hank's, they just stop." "People don't just vanish," Tom said, but his voice carried doubt. They organized a search immediately. By sunset, 20 volunteers, ranchers, neighbors, friends, were combing Hank's property on foot, ATVs, and horseback. They searched through the night, flashlights cutting through darkness, calling Hank's name until their voices went hoarse. Nothing. By Friday morning, the search expanded. Texas Rangers arrived with tracking dogs. A helicopter from Border Patrol swept the area with thermal imaging. Local news picked up the story. Rancher and prize bull vanish without trace. The theories started immediately. Rustlers had stolen Sampson, maybe kidnapped Hank. Drug cartels operating near the border had taken him. Hank had staged it himself. Insurance fraud, running from debt, starting over somewhere new. But the people who knew Hank didn't buy it. He was steady, honest, the kind of man who paid his bills on time and kept his word. And he would never, ever abandon Sampson. "There's something else," Carlos told Tom on Friday evening. 3 weeks ago, Hank mentioned the old storm shelter needed repairs, said the roof was sagging, beams rotting. He was going to fix it this week. Tom's stomach dropped. "Where's the shelter?" "North pasture, 1/4 mile from the house." They found the shelter just before sunset on Friday. It sat half buried in a hillside, an old concrete structure built in the 1950s when tornadoes were common and people prepared for the worst. The metal door was closed but not latched, and when Tom pulled it open, his flashlight beam revealed disaster. The interior support beams had collapsed. The concrete roof had partially caved in, creating a tomb of rubble, dust, and splintered wood. And in the center of the destruction, barely visible through the debris, was a boot. Hank's boot. "Get rescue equipment here now," Tom shouted into his radio. "We've got a collapse, possible survivor." The rescue took 3 hours. They couldn't use heavy machinery, too risky with Hank potentially injured underneath. Everything had to be moved by hand, carefully, piece by piece. When they finally cleared enough debris to reach him, Hank was unconscious, his leg trapped under a fallen beam, his face pale and dusty. But his chest rose and fell, breathing. Alive. "Medic!" Tom yelled. But as they worked to free Hank, someone noticed something that made them all freeze. Sampson stood 50 feet away at the edge of the pasture, watching. The massive bull had been there the whole time, silent, still, waiting. And around the entrance to the collapsed shelter, in the dirt, were prints. Not just cattle prints, defensive prints. The kind a bull makes when it's standing guard, pawing, warning predators away. Scratches in the dirt, signs of scuffling. And just visible in the fading light, tufts of black fur snagged on nearby brush. Coyote fur. "Jesus," Deputy Chen whispered. "The bull's been guarding him for 3 days." They airlifted Hank to the hospital in Alpine. Broken leg, severe dehydration, mild hypothermia, but stable. The doctor said if he'd been out there much longer, exposed to the elements, he wouldn't have made it. Tom stayed at the ranch, staring at Sampson, who had returned to his pen on his own once Hank was loaded into the helicopter. The massive bull stood calmly, drinking from his trough, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But the evidence told a different story. The coyote prints around the shelter, the defensive marks in the dirt. The fact that Sampson, who could have wandered anywhere on 1,200 acres, had stayed within sight of the collapsed shelter for 3 straight days. Carlos approached slowly, his voice filled with awe. "Tom, you know what this means?" "The bull knew," Tom said quietly. "Knew Hank was down there, knew he couldn't get out, and he stood guard. For 72 hours, in 100-degree heat, without anyone telling him to." Tom shook his head slowly. "People are going to have a hard time believing this. But it's true." "Yeah," Tom said, watching Sampson graze peacefully. "It's true." The next morning, the headline in the Marfa Gazette read, "Rancher survives 3-day ordeal. Bull stands guard, protects him from predators." But that was just the beginning of the story. The real story, the one that would be shared across the country, that would bring news crews from Dallas and Houston and beyond, was about loyalty, about a bond between man and animal that transcended logic, that turned a 2,000-pound bull into a guardian angel. And it started when Hank Dalton woke up in a hospital bed and asked one question. "Where's Sampson?" Do you believe an animal can feel so much loyalty and love that it would risk its own life for a human? What would you do if you had a friend like that? Hank Dalton woke up in a hospital bed, with fluorescent lights burning his eyes and the steady beep of monitors filling his ears. His leg was in a cast, his throat felt like sandpaper, and every muscle in his body screamed with pain. But his first thought was, Sampson. "Where's my bull?" His voice came out as a croak. A nurse appeared at his bedside, gentle-faced and efficient. "Mr. Dalton, you're in Alpine Medical Center. You've been unconscious for 18 hours. Try not to move." "Where is Sampson?" Sheriff Tom Rawlings stepped into view, hat in his hands. "He's fine, Hank. Back in his pen at your ranch. Carlos is looking after him." The tension in Hank's body released slightly. "He okay? Not hurt?" "Not a scratch on him." Tom pulled a chair closer. "But we need to talk about what happened. When you're ready." Hank closed his eyes, and it all came flooding back. Wednesday morning. He'd been checking the storm shelter, just like he'd told Carlos he needed to do. The old concrete structure had served the ranch for 70 years, but age and weather had taken their toll. The support beams were rotting, and Hank had noticed the roof sagging the week before. He'd grabbed his toolbox, made the quarter-mile walk to the north pasture, and propped the metal door open to let light in. The interior was dark, musty, filled with old supplies his father had stored decades ago. Sampson had followed him. The bull often did, curious, social in the way cattle could be when they trusted their handler completely. Hank had raised Sampson from a calf, bottle-fed him when his mother had milk fever, spent countless hours training him for shows. "Stay outside, buddy," Hank had told him, giving the bull's massive shoulder a pat. "This is human work." He descended the concrete steps into the shelter, flashlight in hand, and immediately saw the problem. The main support beam had rotted through, compromised by water damage and termites. He'd need to replace the entire thing, maybe call in professional help. He was examining the beam, his back to the entrance, when he heard it. A crack. Sharp and terrible. Then a groan of stressed wood and concrete. Hank had spun around just in time to see the roof collapsing. He tried to run, but the debris came too fast. A beam caught his leg, pinning him. Chunks of concrete rained down, filling the shelter with dust so thick he couldn't breathe. When the dust settled, Hank was trapped. His right leg was pinned under 200 pounds of wood and concrete. Pain exploded through his body, so intense he nearly passed out. The entrance was blocked by rubble. His flashlight was buried somewhere in the debris, and the darkness was absolute. He'd tried to move the beam. Couldn't. Tried to drag himself free. The pain made him scream, and he realized his leg was broken, badly. His phone was in his truck, parked by the house. No one knew he was here. Carlos wasn't due to check on him until Friday. He was going to die in this hole. That's when he heard it. A sound from above, from beyond the rubble blocking the entrance, a deep, rumbling bellow. Sampson. "Hey, boy," Hank called out, his voice weak. "I'm stuck. Can't get out." The bull bellowed again, louder, more insistent, the sound of hooves pawing at the ground. Sampson was trying to dig, trying to get to him. "It's okay," Hank said, though he knew it wasn't. "Go on home. Someone will come." But Sampson didn't leave. The first night was the worst. Hank drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in his leg constant and brutal. He was thirsty, desperately thirsty. But there was no water. The shelter was exposed to the elements through gaps in the collapsed roof, and the Texas heat during the day was suffocating. But at night, the temperature dropped, and in early March, Texas nights could still bite cold. Hank shivered in the darkness, his body going into shock, hypothermia creeping in. He tried to stay awake, tried to focus on breathing, on surviving until morning. That's when he heard them. Coyotes. Their yips and howls echoed through the night, close, getting closer. Hank knew what they were doing. They'd smelled blood, smelled an injured animal, and they were coming to investigate. Fear cut through his pain. He couldn't defend himself, couldn't even move. If they got into the shelter. Then came a sound that made his heart surge with hope and fear combined. Sampson's bellow. Not the gentle rumble from before. This was a challenge, a warning, the sound of a bull ready to fight. Hank heard the coyotes yelp, heard scrambling, heard Sampson's hooves thundering against the ground. The massive bull was charging, driving them away. For the next hour, Hank listened to the battle above. Coyotes testing, probing, trying to get around Sampson. And Sampson standing firm, bellowing his rage, his hooves striking the ground with percussive force. Eventually, the coyotes gave up. Their howls faded into the distance, and Sampson remained. "Good boy," Hank whispered into the darkness. "Good boy." The second day blurred into fever dreams. Hank's leg was infected, his body shutting down from dehydration. He hallucinated, saw his ex-wife standing in the corner of the shelter, saw his father telling him to get up and stop being lazy. But through it all, he heard Sampson. The bull never left. Hank could hear him moving above, hear his occasional bellows, hear him drinking from the stock tank 100 yards away before returning. Standing guard. By the third day, Hank barely had the strength to call out. His voice was a whisper, his body weak beyond measure. He thought about dying, about whether it would hurt or just feel like falling asleep. That's when he heard voices. Distant at first, then closer. Men shouting his name. The sound of ATVs, of rescue equipment. "Here," Hank tried to say, but nothing came out. Then Sampson bellowed, Loud, insistent, the same sound he'd made when Hank was first trapped. Again and again, calling attention, demanding they come. And they did. Tom listened to Hank's account in silence, his expression shifting from disbelief to wonder. "The bull stayed with you for 3 days," Tom said slowly. "Fought off coyotes, guided us to you with his bellowing. He saved my life," Hank said simply. "No question about it. I'd be dead if he'd wandered off. Dead if those coyotes had gotten to me. Dead if you all hadn't heard him calling." "Hank, that's extraordinary. Bulls don't do that. They're livestock, not guard dogs." "Sampson did." Tom pulled out his phone, showing Hank photos from the scene. The defensive marks in the dirt. The coyote fur snagged on brush. The way Sampson had positioned himself between the shelter entrance and the wild country beyond. "The evidence backs you up," Tom said. "But people are going to have questions. News crews are already calling. Everyone wants to know about the bull who saved his owner." Hank looked at the photos, his eyes filling with tears. "I raised him from 3 days old. Fed him every 4 hours with a bottle. Slept in the barn next to him when he was sick. He's not just livestock to me, Tom. He's family. I believe you," Tom said quietly. "And after seeing what he did, I think a lot of other people will too." The story hit national news within 24 hours. "Texas bull stands guard over trapped rancher for 3 days," ran on CNN. "Miracle in Marfa, cattle's loyalty saves owner's life," appeared in USA Today. Social media exploded with videos, photos, and debates about animal intelligence and emotional capacity. Hank's hospital room became a circus. Reporters camped outside Alpine Medical Center, demanding interviews. His phone, retrieved from his truck and brought to him by Carlos, rang constantly with calls from morning shows, documentaries, even Hollywood producers wanting to option his story. "Make it stop," Hank told Tom on his 3rd day in the hospital. "I don't want this attention. I just want to go home and take care of my ranch." But Tom's expression was grave. "Hank, there's something you need to know. The attention isn't just media. You've got people showing up at your ranch. Tourists, admirers, people wanting to see Sampson. Carlos called this morning. Said there were 15 cars parked on your property yesterday." "What? They can't just..." "They're trespassing, yeah. Carlos has been running them off, but it's getting out of hand." Tom paused. "There's also been offers, lots of them." "What kind of offers?" "For Sampson. Breeders offering 6 figures. A zoo in Dallas wants him for an exhibit about animal intelligence. A ranching museum wants to buy him as a permanent display. There's even a billionaire in Houston offering $200,000. Hank's face went red. "He's not for sale." "I know that. Carlos knows that. But these people don't." Tom pulled out a folder thick with printed emails and faxes. "You're going to need help managing this, Hank. Maybe a lawyer, definitely better security for your property." "I'm a rancher, Tom. I work cattle. I don't know how to deal with whatever this is." "Then you're going to learn fast," Tom said, "because this isn't going away." Hank was discharged on Monday, 1 week after the collapse. His leg was in a walking cast, and doctors ordered him to stay off it for 6 weeks minimum. Physical therapy would follow. Full recovery would take months. Carlos picked him up in Hank's own truck, and the drive back to the ranch was quiet. As they turned onto the dirt road leading to the property, Hank saw what Tom had warned about. A news van was parked near his gate. 2 cars with out-of-state plates sat in his driveway. A group of people with cameras stood near Sampson's pen, taking photos. "They've been like this all week," Carlos said, his jaw tight. "I called the sheriff's department twice yesterday. They send deputies out, clear everyone, and an hour later more people show up." Hank got out of the truck slowly, his leg throbbing. "Everyone off my property," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd worked this land for 37 years. "Now!" A reporter rushed forward, microphone extended. "Mr. Dalton, can we get a statement about..." "No, get out. Just 5 minutes. I said get out before I call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing." The crowd dispersed slowly, reluctantly, taking photos as they left. One woman called out, "We just wanted to see the hero bull." "He's not a circus animal," Hank snapped. "He's my bull, and this is my home. Respect that." When they were finally alone, Hank walked, limped, to Sampson's pen. The massive black bull stood in the shade of the barn, and when he saw Hank, his head lifted. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Sampson walked forward, slowly, carefully, until he stood at the fence. He lowered his head, and Hank reached through the rails to scratch behind his ears, the way he'd done 1,000 times before. "Thank you," Hank whispered. "You saved my life, buddy. I won't forget that." Sampson rumbled, that deep, contented sound, and pressed his massive head against Hank's hand. Carlos stood back, watching. "You know this doesn't end here, right? The attention, the offers, it's just getting started." "I know," Hank said, not looking away from Sampson. "But I don't care what they're offering. He's not leaving this ranch. Ever." Over the next 2 weeks, the situation escalated. A veterinary science professor from Texas A&M came to study Sampson's behavior, wanting to understand the loyalty and protective instinct he'd displayed. Animal behaviorists requested permission to observe him. Documentary crews offered money for access. Hank turned them all down, but the offers kept increasing. 200,000 became 300,000. An animal rights organization offered to create a permanent sanctuary for Sampson on Hank's property, fully funded, staff provided in exchange for public access. "They don't get it," Hank told May over coffee at the diner, finally returning to his Thursday tradition. "Sampson isn't a commodity. He's not a research subject or a tourist attraction. He's my friend." "People are having trouble understanding that," May said gently. "To them, he's just a bull. Livestock, then they don't understand cattle." Hank stirred his coffee, frustrated. "I've worked with cattle my whole life. They're not stupid. They're not emotionless. They form bonds, they remember, they care. Sampson proved that." "So make people understand," May said. "Do one interview, a good one. Tell your story, Sampson's story, on your terms. Then maybe they'll leave you alone." Hank agreed to one interview, 60 minutes. They came to the ranch with a small crew, respectful, professional. The correspondent, a woman named Rebecca Chan, had done her research. They filmed Hank working around the ranch, filmed Sampson grazing peacefully, filmed the collapsed storm shelter that nearly killed him. And they interviewed Hank, sitting on his porch, the Texas landscape stretching behind him. "People are calling Sampson a hero," Rebecca said. "Do you agree with that assessment?" "I don't know about hero," Hank said carefully. "But I know he made a choice. When that shelter collapsed, he could have wandered off, could have gone back to the barn, back to food and water and comfort. But he stayed. For 3 days, in 100-degree heat, he stayed. Fought off coyotes that could have hurt him. Called for help when the rescuers came. That's not instinct. That's loyalty. Some scientists argue that cattle aren't capable of that kind of emotional decision-making. Then those scientists haven't spent enough time with cattle." Hank's voice was firm. "I raised Sampson from 3 days old. Bottle-fed him, nursed him through illness, spent thousands of hours with him. He knows me, knows my voice, my routine, my presence. And when I was in trouble, he stayed. If that's not emotion, not caring, then I don't know what is." Rebecca paused, then asked the question Hank knew was coming. "You've been offered substantial money for Sampson. Life-changing money. Why turn it down?" Hank looked at the camera directly. "Because some things aren't for sale. Sampson saved my life. How do you put a price on that? How do you sell the being that stood between you and death?" He shook his head. "I can't. Won't. This is his home, and he's staying here until he dies of old age, whenever that is. That's my promise to him." The interview aired 3 weeks later and changed everything. The trespassing stopped. The aggressive offers stopped. People began to understand that this wasn't about money or fame. It was about respect, loyalty, and the bond between a man and an animal who'd chosen to save him. Letters poured in from across the country. Not offers, but thank you notes. Stories from other people about their own animals. Dogs who'd alerted families to fires, horses who'd stayed with injured riders, even other cattle who'd shown unexpected intelligence and care. "You made people see them differently," Carlos said, reading through the letters at Hank's kitchen table. "Not as livestock or property, but as beings. with thoughts and feelings. That's all I wanted, Hank said quietly. But there was one letter that stood out. It came from a 9-year-old girl in Montana named Emma Chen. Dear Mr. Dalton, I saw your story on TV with my parents. I have a calf I saved named Hope. My dad wanted to get rid of her because she was born sick, but I bottle-fed her just like you did with Sampson. She's healthy now. After seeing your story, my dad said Hope can stay forever because I taught him that animals are more than just farm equipment. Thank you for showing people that love matters more than money. Emma Hank read the letter 3 times, his eyes burning with tears. You okay? Carlos asked. Yeah, Hank said, folding the letter carefully. More than okay. 6 months after the collapse, life at the Double D Ranch had found a new rhythm. Hank's leg had healed, though he walked with a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of those 3 days trapped in darkness. The storm shelter had been demolished, filled in, the area seeded with grass. Hank never wanted to see it again, but everything else had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The ranch had become a quiet destination for people seeking something real. Not tourists with cameras, but families who rode ahead asking permission to visit, to meet Sampson, to understand the bond between man and animal. Hank limited visits to Saturdays, 2 families maximum, and only if they respected that Sampson wasn't a spectacle, he was family. A young couple from Austin came with their daughter, who was terrified of large animals after a dog attack. Watching her slowly approach Sampson, tentatively touch his side, then smile as he rumbled contentedly, it reminded Hank why the story mattered. He's gentle, the girl whispered, wonder in her eyes. He is, Hank agreed, but he's also strong enough to protect what he loves. Carlos had moved into the ranch's small guest house, helping Hank manage the property. At 62, Carlos had been ready to retire, but watching what happened with Sampson had given him purpose again. We're not just ranching anymore, Carlos said one evening. We're teaching, showing people that animals aren't just resources. Hank nodded. Never thought I'd be doing this, but yeah, feels right. The offers for Sampson had stopped, but opportunities kept coming. A university wanted to establish a scholarship in Sampson's name for students studying animal behavior. A children's book author wanted to write Sampson's story, all proceeds going to farm animal welfare. A sanctuary for retired farm animals asked Hank to serve on their advisory board. Hank accepted the scholarship and the book. The advisory position took more consideration. I'm just a rancher, he told the sanctuary director over the phone. You're more than that now, she replied. You're living proof that these animals matter. Your voice could change policies, change how people see livestock. Hank thought about all the messages from farmers and ranchers who'd started treating their animals differently after hearing his story. All right, he said finally. I'll do it. On the 1-year anniversary of the collapse, Hank woke early and walked to the north pasture. The area where the storm shelter had been was now covered in wildflowers, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush, vibrant against the red Texas dirt. Sampson followed him as he always did now. The bull rarely left Hank's side when he was working, a constant protective presence. Been a year, Hank said, scratching Sampson's shoulder. Lots changed, hasn't it, buddy? Sampson rumbled, that deep, contented sound. People want to make it complicated, want to study you, analyze you, figure out the science, but I think it's simpler than that. Hank looked at the massive animal. You stayed because you cared. Because somewhere in that brain of yours, you understood I was in trouble, and you decided I was worth protecting. Sampson pressed his massive head against Hank's chest, gentle despite his size. That afternoon, local news came for a follow-up piece. Amy Rodriguez from the Marfa station, someone who understood the community. How has life changed? Amy asked. In every way that matters, Hank said honestly. I see my animals differently, see my purpose differently. Sampson taught me ranching isn't just about production, it's about relationship, about respect. What do you want people to take away from your story? Hank considered carefully. That animals aren't machines. They're beings with thoughts, feelings, capacity for loyalty and love. When we treat them that way, extraordinary things can happen. Like a bull saving his owner's life, like that. But also like farmers giving their animals better lives. Like kids learning to see cattle as friends. Like a whole shift in how we think about the creatures we share this world with. Amy smiled. That's quite a legacy for one bull. Hank looked at Sampson, grazing peacefully nearby. He earned it. As the sun set that evening, Hank sat on his porch with Carlos, cold beers in hand. You ever regret turning down all that money? Carlos asked. Not once, Hank said. Money's temporary. What Sampson and I have, that's permanent. He won't live forever. Bulls, even healthy ones, maybe 15 years. I know. Hank's voice was quiet. But however many years he's got left, he'll spend them here, happy, safe, loved. That's what matters. Sampson rumbled once, a sound of contentment that carried across the pasture. And Hank smiled, knowing that some bonds transcend understanding and matter more than anything money could ever buy. 5 years after the collapse, Hank Dalton turned 63. Sampson was 10 now, entering what most would consider old age for a bull. His movements were slower, more deliberate. Gray had crept into the black around his muzzle. But his eyes were still bright, still intelligent, and he still followed Hank everywhere. The Double D Ranch had become something Hank never imagined. A working ranch, yes, but also a teaching place. Veterinary students came for internships, learning not just about cattle health, but about relationships with animals. School groups visited to understand where their food came from and why humane treatment mattered. Carlos's grandson, Miguel, now worked the ranch full-time. At 22, he'd grown up hearing Sampson's story and understood what the ranch represented. My generation sees this differently, Miguel told Hank one morning. We don't just see livestock as production units, we see them as partners. Sampson proved that's possible. Hank watched the young man work, patient with the cattle, respectful, building trust instead of demanding obedience. Your generation gives me hope, he said. One Saturday in October, a family arrived for a scheduled visit. The father was a rancher from Oklahoma, struggling with the same questions Hank had faced: how to balance profit with ethics, efficiency with compassion. His 8-year-old son, Danny, was shy, hanging back while his parents talked with Hank. Want to meet Sampson? Hank asked the boy gently. Danny nodded, nervous. They walked to the pasture where Sampson grazed. The massive bull lifted his head, seeing Hank, and walked over with that familiar rumbling sound. Put your hand out flat, Hank instructed Danny. Let him smell you first. Danny's hand trembled, but he did it. Sampson sniffed, then gently pressed his huge head against the boy's palm. Danny's face transformed, fear replaced by wonder. He's so gentle. He is, but he's also the bull who saved my life. Stood guard for 3 days, fought off coyotes, refused to leave me. Hank knelt beside the boy. Animals aren't just things, Danny. They think, they feel, they remember. And when you treat them with respect, they give it back. The boy's father watched, his expression shifting. I've been treating my herd like numbers on a spreadsheet, he admitted quietly. Watching this, I need to change that. It's never too late to change, Hank said. That evening, after the family left, Hank sat with Sampson in the pasture as the sun set. He'd started doing this more often lately, just sitting, being present, grateful for every day they still had together. You know what you did, buddy, Hank said, his hand on Sampson's shoulder. You didn't just save my life that day. You changed it, gave it meaning I didn't know I needed. Sampson's rumble was softer now, quieter with age, but still there. I used to think success was about how much I produced, how much profit I made, but you taught me it's about connection, about seeing the beings around us as more than their utility. Hank's voice cracked. You taught me how to be human again. The bull leaned into his touch, that simple gesture of trust and affection they'd shared for a decade. A month later, Hank received a letter from Emma Chen, the 9-year-old from Montana who'd written years ago about her calf, Hope. Dear Mr. Dalton, I'm 14 now. Hope is 5 and healthy. Because of your story, and Sampson, my whole family changed how we treat our animals. My dad started a program teaching other ranchers about ethical treatment. We named it the Sampson Project. I want to be a large animal vet when I grow up. I want to help people see their animals the way you see Sampson, as family, not just livestock. Thank you for showing me that was possible. Hank read the letter twice, tears on his cheeks. You hear that, Sampson? He said, showing the bull the paper as if he could read it. You started something. Kids growing up different, treating animals different because of what you did. Carlos found them in the barn, Hank crying, Sampson standing close. You okay? Better than okay, Hank said. I'm realizing that what happened 5 years ago, it wasn't just about survival. It was about showing people what's possible when we choose love over profit, relationship over efficiency. That's Sampson's legacy. Our legacy, Hank corrected. His and mine, together. As winter arrived, Hank and Sampson fell into their evening routine, a slow walk around the property, checking fences, watching the sunset, simply being together. One evening, Sampson stopped at the spot where the storm shelter used to be, now covered in dormant wildflower stems waiting for spring. You remember, don't you? Hank said softly. That's where it happened, where you chose to stay. Sampson looked at him with those deep, knowing eyes. I'll never forget it, Hank continued. Never forget what you did. And I promise you, however much time you've got left, you'll spend it here, loved and safe. That's my vow. The bull rumbled once, then continued walking, Hank at his side. Behind them, the Texas sky painted itself in shades of gold and crimson. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, full of purpose. And Hank Dalton, rancher, teacher, keeper of promises, walked beside the bull who'd saved his life and taught him how to live it. The circle was complete, but the story would continue, rippling outward through Emma and Miguel and countless others who'd learned that the greatest measure of humanity is how we treat those who cannot demand it. Sampson had shown them the way, and Hank would spend the rest of his life making sure no one forgot.